The House is coming back in now for votes on bills debated earlier today, including a number of measures allowing the Capitol grounds to be used for several upcoming events.
Including some of my own family.
And for other purposes, waiving a requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 with respect to consideration of certain resolutions reported from the Committee on Rules and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, proceedings will resume on motions to suspend the rules previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. House Concurrent Resolution 105 by the yeas and nays. House Concurrent Resolution 117 by the yeas and nays. House Concurrent Resolution 118 by the yeas and nays. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, to suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 105, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 105, concurrent resolution authorizing the use of Emancipation Hall in the Capitol Visitor Center for an event to celebrate the birthday of King Kamehameha.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the concurrent resolution? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House is voting on a resolution that authorizes the use of Emancipation Hall in the Capitol Visitor Center for an event to celebrate the birth of King Kamehameha. 2 more votes after this one. The House Budget Committee today advanced legislation that would cut $300 billion from social programs over 10 years that Republicans intend to substitute for the automatic spending that would take place early next year. The panel voted 21-9 to move the measure to the floor. And later today, the committee will continue debating a related bill that Congressional Quarterly writes would stop most of the $109 billion in those across-the-board spending cuts. The markup is expected to continue late into the night. The committee right now is taking a break for these House votes, and our live coverage of the committee will continue when they come back in session tonight on the C-SPAN networks. Today, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta met with his counterpart in China.
Good afternoon. It's my privilege and honor to welcome General Liang back to the Pentagon.
我感到非常的荣幸，能够欢迎梁上将再回到五角大楼。
I'm pleased that in the course of his visit to the United States, General Liang has had the opportunity to visit a number of important military installations and receive some very thorough briefings and demonstrations from our military leaders.
我感到非常的高兴，在梁上将访问美国期间，他呢已经有机会去参观了一些非常重要的军事设施，而且呢从我们的军事将领那里听到了一些情况介绍和演示。
We just finished a very productive meeting, our first since I became Secretary of Defense.
我们刚才呢进行了非常有成效的这会议，这个呢是我成为国防部长以来的第一次和他的会晤。
This continued the regular dialogue between military and political leaders from the United States and China.
这个呢延续了在美国和中国政治和军事领袖之间的经常的对话。
Earlier this year, as you know, I was honored to be able to host Vice President Xi here at the Pentagon during his visit to the United States.
今年早些时候，大家也知道，我有机会呢，非常荣幸的欢迎习近平副主席他来访美的时候呢，来到了我们五角大楼进行访问。
And I was pleased by the successful outcome of last week's 4th Strategic and Economic Dialogue and the 2nd Strategic Security Dialogue, at which Jim Miller, our Acting Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, led the Department's delegation.
另外呢，我也非常高兴看到了上周的第4届美中战略与经济对话以及第2轮的美中战略安全对话的成果。那么在那次对话期间呢，吉姆·米勒他是我们国防部负责政策的代理副部长，也率领了我们国防部的代表团。
In my meeting with General Liang, I expressed my commitment to achieving and maintaining a healthy, stable, reliable, and continuous mill-to-mill relationship with China.
在我跟梁上将的会晤当中呢，我表达了我们将致力于实现和维护一个健康、稳定、可靠和延续的和中国之间的两军的关系。
And as a symbol of that, during our meeting, General Liang invited me to visit China. And I look forward to doing that within the next few months.
那么，作为这样的一个两军关系的标志，在我们的会晤期间呢，梁上将向我发出了邀请我在这个接下来的这个几个月的时间里面去中国访问，我也非常期待着这个访问。
The United States and China are both Pacific powers, and our relationship is one of the most critical in the world.
美国和中国都是太平洋的大国，我们之间的关系是世界上的所有的两国关系当中最至关重要的一个。
We share many interests across the Asia-Pacific region and beyond, from humanitarian assistance to concerns about weapons of mass destruction, to terrorism, to drug interdictions, to trade, to counter piracy.
我们美国和中国呢，都有很多的这个共同的利益，这个呢是在亚太地区以及超越了这个地区的。我们的共同利益呢，包括人道主义援助、防止大规模杀伤性武器的扩散、反恐、打击毒品以及贸易通商以及反海盗等领域。
It's essential for our two nations to communicate effectively on a range of very challenging issues.
对于我们两个国家之间能够有效地进行沟通、讨论一系列的有挑战的议题是至关重要的。
The United States and China have already worked together in a variety of areas. We are expanding our cooperation, particularly in areas such as peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and counter piracy.
美国和中国呢，已经在一系列的领域展开了这个合作。我们呢正在扩大这些合作的领域，尤其是像在维和、在人道主义援助和灾难的救助以及反海盗等这些领域。
On counter piracy, China has ably conducted maritime operations in the Gulf of Aden for more than 3 years, and these operations have helped to secure the free flow of commerce in vital sea lanes from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean.
在反海盗的领域，中国呢已经在亚丁湾在过去在3年多的时间里面呢展开了非常有能力的海上的行动。这些的行动呢能够帮助这一个地区在这一个非常至关重要的海上通道，这是从红海到印度洋之间的这一个海上通道之间的商业的自由的流动。
I thanked General Liang for these efforts. And later this year, in fact, the United States and Chinese ships will conduct a combined counter-piracy exercise in the Gulf of Aden.
那我非常感谢梁上将，感谢他这个中国呢所做出的这些努力。今年晚些时候呢，事实上美国和中国的舰只将会是在亚丁湾展开一个联合的反海盗的军事演习。
On humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, I conveyed to the General my appreciation for China co-chairing a group dedicated to these efforts on behalf of the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus.
在人道主义援助和灾难的救助方面呢，我已经向梁上将表示了我们的这个赞赏，因为中国呢是在东盟防长扩大会议的这个层面上面呢是共同主持了这一个工作的一个小组。
On regional security challenges, we talked about North Korea and other areas of mutual interest that require our continued cooperation and dialogue.
那在我们的地区安全方面的这个挑战上面呢，我们谈了朝鲜和巴基斯坦这两个我们有共同利益的这个地区呢，是需要我们进行不断的合作和对话的。
And on other issues, we discussed maritime areas, cyberspace, nuclear proliferation, and missile defense as well.
另外，在其他的议题上面，我们也讨论了海上安全、网络空间、以及核的不扩散，还有导弹的防御。
As you all know, the United States Department of Defense recently released a new defense strategy, recognizing that no region is more important than the Asia Pacific for our country's future peace and prosperity.
我想众所周知，美国的国防部最近呢，发布了一个新的国防的战略。我们在这个战略当中意识到，亚太地区呢，对于我们的国家的未来的和平和繁荣来讲呢，是最重要的。
Our goal is to enhance our cooperation throughout the region, to enhance our cooperation with China, so that we can promote peace and stability in that region.
那我们的目标呢，就是要在整个这个地区加强合作，这个也要和中国加强合作，以便于能够实现我们的实现这个地区的和平和稳定的目标。
We recognize that the United States and China will not always agree on every issue, but we believe our military-to-military dialogue is critical to ensuring that we avoid dangerous misunderstandings and misperceptions that could lead to crisis.
那我们当然也意识到，美国和中国之间呢，不可能就所有的议题都能够达成一致意见。那我们的两军之间的对话呢，就是显得尤其的至关重要。这样的话呢，才能够确保我们避免那些可能给我们带来危机的非常危险的误解和误判。
A positive, cooperative, comprehensive United States-China relationship is absolutely essential to achieving a secure Asia-Pacific region and a more secure future for both of our nations.
美中之间的全面积极合作的关系是至关重要的，只有它呢，才能够实现一个安全的亚太地区，以及为我们两国呢都带来更加安全的未来。
General Liang, thank you for your leadership. And now let me turn it over to you.
那梁上将非常感谢您所发挥的领导力。现在呢，我就把话筒给您。
各位记者、各位女士、各位朋友，大家下午好。
Friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good afternoon.
我也帕累他不断的邀请，率中国高级军事代表团访问美国。
At the invitation of Secretary Panetta, I am leading the PLA senior military delegation to visit the United States.
带来了中国人民和中国军队对美国人民和美国军队的一片深情厚谊。
I am bringing the friendship from the Chinese people and the Chinese military.
我这一次访问的目的，主要是落实胡锦涛主席和奥巴马总统就发展中美两国两军关系达成的重要共识，增进了解，加强互信，推动中美两国两军关系，特别是两军的关系，提高到一个新的水平，使我们两军的关系始终能够得到健康、稳定的向前发展。
The purpose of my visit this time is to implement the important agreements reached by President Hu Jintao and President Obama on developing the China-U.S. state-to-state and military-to-military relationship, to increase mutual understanding, to promote mutual trust, and to raise the level of our state-to-state and military-to-military relationship, in particular our military relationship, and to ensure that this relationship can continue to develop in a sound and stable manner.
美方对我这一次访问非常重视，尤其是帕雷塔部长为我这一次访问做了周到的安排。从4号下午进入旧金山以后，到现在我已经访问2、3天了。这2、3天，我感到非常的高兴，也看了很多的项目，也得到很多的收益或启示。
The U.S. side attaches great importance to my visit this time. In particular, Secretary Panetta has made considerable arrangement to my visit. I arrived in the United States in San Francisco on the afternoon of the 4th of May. It's been 3 days, and I've been very glad during the past 3 days. I've seen a lot of military units and received many benefits and inspirations during my visit.
对美方的周到安排和热情接待，我要表示衷心的感谢。
And here I would like to thank the U.S. side for its considerable arrangement and its warm hospitality.
今天上午，我和代理国务卿贝恩斯就国际上的一些形势以及我们共同关系的问题，两军的关系进行了深入的交谈。
This morning, I had a meeting with Mr. Burns, the Deputy Secretary of State. We had an in-depth discussion and candid discussion on international security situation, on the issues of our common interests, and also we discussed our military and military relationship.
刚才我与帕雷塔部长在坦诚友好的气氛当中，就我们共同关心的一些问题，特别是两军关系的问题，进行了深入的讨论，达成了重要的共识。
Just now, I had a meeting with Secretary Panetta in the atmosphere of candidness and friendship. We discussed many issues of common concerns by the two militaries, and the discussion has been deep. We have reached many agreements during that meeting.
我可以坦诚地告诉记者们，我们两个达成的共识主要在以下4个方面。
I can candidly show to the media that we have reached the following agreements.
一个共识呢，就是我们双方一致认为，中美两军关系是中美两国关系的重要组成部分。双方致力于在胡锦涛主席和奥巴马总统关于构建中美相互尊重、互利共赢合作伙伴关系的框架下，发展健康、稳定、可靠的两军关系。
The first agreement, both sides reaffirmed the China-U.S. military-to-military relationship as an essential component of bilateral relations, and are committed to building a sound, stable, and reliable military-to-military relationship in accordance with President Hu Jintao and President Barack Obama's shared vision for a China-U.S. cooperative partnership based on mutual respect and mutual benefit.
第二一个共识是双方一致认为，我们应该继续加强两国防务部门和两军之间的战略沟通，坚持通过对话磋商增进战略互信，妥善处理分歧和敏感问题。中方邀请美国国防部长帕雷塔先生在今年下半年双方 方面的时候到中国访问。刚才他已经发表了这一个消息。双方将继续发挥中美国防部防务磋商、国防部工作会晤、海上军事安全磋商机制和国防部直通电话的重要作用，通过对话与交流，加深了解，扩大共识，增进互信，减少分歧。
Both sides reaffirmed the need for continuous strategic communication and upheld that the two sides should enhance strategic mutual trust through dialogues and consultations and properly handle differences and sensitive issues. The Chinese side invited U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta to pay a visit to China at the second half of this year at the time convenient for both sides. And just now, Secretary Panetta just released that news. Both sides will continue to take the advantage of the defense consultative talks, the defense policy coordination talks, and the military maritime consultative agreement, and the defense telephone link as important channels to deepen understanding, expand consensus, improve mutual trust, and reduce differences.
第三一个共识是中美双方一致认为，中美两军应当继续加强各个层次、各个领域的务实性交流与合作，不断扩大共同利益。双方同意在人道主义救援减灾、军事档案、环保、医学、院校教育、文体等领域广泛开展交流与合作。
Both sides agreed that the two militaries should continue to strengthen pragmatic exchanges and cooperation at all levels and across all areas, with a view to expanding common interests. Both sides agreed to enhance exchanges and cooperation with respect to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, military environmental protection, medical, educational, cultural, sports, military archive, and other fields.
第11点共识就是双方一致认为，当前亚太地区安全形势复杂严峻，加强两军在安全领域的合作，有利于维护本地区的和平与稳定，符合双方的根本利益。为了应对各种安全威胁和挑战，中美两军应继续加强在反传统安全领域的合作。 双方同意于年内举行人道主义救援减灾、反海盗等联合的演训。
Both sides acknowledge that the security situation in the Asia-Pacific region has been complicated, and that cooperation in security areas is conducive to peace and stability of the region, and serves each other's fundamental interests. In response to the full range of security threats and challenges, the two militaries should further advance exchanges and cooperation on non-traditional security front. Both sides agreed to conduct joint exercises on HADR and counter-piracy this year.
我可以告诉记者朋友，我们将把这一些共识转发到我们今后的实际行动当中。 我们愿与美国的朋友，同时我也愿意帕雷塔部长一道，来共同推进这一些意见的落实。
Friends for the media, I will ensure you that the Chinese side will implement these agreements with our concrete actions. We would like to work together with our U.S. friends and Secretary Panetta together to implement those agreements in our concrete actions.
我们认为，中美两国关系正处在一个新的历史起点上，建立与中美合作伙伴关系发展相适应的、平等互利、合作共赢的新型军事关系，是两国防务部门的共同责任。 也是世界和地区各国的共同期待。中方愿与美方共同努力，认真落实两国元首的重要共识，尊重双方的核心利益和重大关切，妥善处理矛盾与分歧，加强对话与沟通，深化务实合作，推动两军关系健康稳定向前发展。
At present, China-U.S. bilateral relationship is on a new starting line in history. To build a new type of China-U.S. military relationship based on equality, cooperation, and mutual benefit, which is in accordance with the level of China-U.S. cooperative partnership, is the common responsibility of the defense departments of both countries and the common aspiration of global and regional countries. China would like to work with the U.S. to seriously implement these important agreements.
The concurrent resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, to suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 117, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 117. Concurrent resolution authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the National Peace Officers Memorial Service.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the concurrent resolution? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The resolution authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the 31st Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service. One more vote after this one. Later this week, the House will debate federal spending for commerce, justice, and science programs. The Associated Press writes that the White House today said they'd veto the bill, charging its GOP authors with violating last summer's budget pact and cutting programs like legal aid to the poor too deeply. We talk with the Capitol Hill reporter about that and a bill the House Budget Committee is working on today. John Stanton, staff writer at Roll Call. Congress returns to the Capitol today after a week-long break, and the House is kicking off its return with a markup in the Budget Committee on something commonly referred to as the defense sequester. What's that about?
Basically, the defense sequester is a provision that was included in last summer's debt ceiling agreement, which basically it was supposed to be the hammer to force the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats in the White House to all get together to find a long-term solution to the deficit problem and the debt problem. They were, of course, unable to do that with the big super committee thing last year, and this is the cuts that are going to be forced on the government if they don't come up with a solution before the first of the next year. And the reason they call it the defense sequester is because a lot of the cuts are coming from the defense side, and Republicans want to shift most of those cuts into the domestic side of the spending ledger. So this is the beginning of their attempt to do so.
And so what is House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan trying to do with the bill that's being considered in the committee?
Well, realistically, what he's trying to do is he's trying to set down sort of two things. One is a basic marker of where Republicans think that the cuts should come from, and to try to sort of steer some of the spending bills that will be done later on this year, the omnibus that will probably be done in September, in that general direction.
Why is this a top priority for Republicans?
Because they feel like, you know, that the cuts that are being made are just very, very deep. They're very concerned about the effect it's going to have in the military. Frankly, a lot of it is also political. They see it as a winning issue for them to be able to go to the public and say, you know, Democrats are refusing to protect the military from these cuts that, you know, Leon Panetta has said will devastate the Air Force and the Navy and the Army.
What's the timetable for getting this through the House?
Well, realistically, this won't get through the House at all until after the election. There'll be some attempts at it probably now. We'll see probably a couple other efforts in the House, possibly something in the Senate, a Democratic sort of alternative to it. But the idea that something is going to get passed before the election is a non-starter. During the lame duck is when we'll see it.
So you're saying in the House, not until after the election, but what about the Senate?
Well, in the Senate may do its own version of this if they feel like there's a lot of political pressure being put on them, because the House can pass something with, Republican votes, but it won't go into the Senate. So the Senate may try to pass their own thing, just to sort of show that they are concerned about the issue and working on it. But a full bill actually getting to the president won't happen before the beginning of November.
The House is also turning its attention to the first appropriations bill to keep the federal government funded in fiscal 2013. What can you tell us about that bill?
Well, again, this bill is one of the few. It's the Commerce, Justice, and Science bill that will probably be one of the few that actually get through Congress and get enacted this year. It's what provides funding for the Commerce Department, for Justice Department, and science programs, and it's one of the least controversial bills that Congress generally does, and it looks like it's going to be one of maybe 2 or 3 that actually get done this year. And
what are some of the other issues that you're tracking in Congress?
Well, right now we have one of the big things that's on deck is the transportation conference between the House and Senate. And that's to set up anywhere between 2 and maybe 4-year highway authorization to spend money on roads and bridges and things like that. It's unclear how that's going to resolve itself. The Senate passed a very, very popular strongly bipartisan version. House Republicans rejected that, passed their own version fairly narrowly, and have gone into conference now with the Senate, and we'll sort of see over the next week or 2 what happens with that.
John Stanton is a staff writer at Roll Call. Thank you.
Anytime.
The House Budget Committee is working on the defense sequester that was mentioned in the interview in 2 parts. Members already voted today 21-9 on a plan to cut spending on food stamps, Medicaid, a child tax credit, Meals on Wheels, and other social programs. And later today, the committee will continue debating a related bill that would prevent $109 billion in those across-the-board spending cuts expected to take effect in January. The House Budget Committee markup is expected to continue late into the night, and our live coverage will continue when they gamble back in on C-SPAN 2.
This vote, the yeas are 377, the nays are 0, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The concurrent resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, to suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 118, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 118. Concurrent resolution authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the District of Columbia Special Olympics Law Enforcement Torch Run.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the concurrent resolution? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. In the affirmative.
Mr. Crowley. Mr. Crowley votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 375, the nays are 0, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the concurrent resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that my name be removed as co-sponsor of H.R. 361.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much.
You're going straight to 1 minute?
Yes, sir. You guys don't have anything else.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? I will.
Address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
The House shall be in order. Would all members please take your conversations from the floor? Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor Eagle Scout Ralph Boyes, age 93, who has finally been recognized for attaining the rank of Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts of America 78 years after meeting the requirements for this distinguished rank. Ralph had met all the requirements of the rank of Eagle as a sophomore in high school in 1933, but his family relocated and he was never able to appear in his court of honor to receive his badge. After college, Ralph enlisted in the Army and served many assignments throughout his military career, including General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters staff during the Philippine campaign of World War II. After the war, Ralph served posts in Germany, Vietnam, and at the Pentagon, retiring as a lieutenant colonel in 1967. After his retirement, he began to search to find his records of his qualification for the rank of Eagle. After several dead ends and ultimately finding that the last of his scouting records had been consumed in a fire several years earlier, he went through the requirement list with a family friend and found that Ralph's merit badges and military career of 28 years more than qualified him for the distinguished rank. On December 22, 2011, Ralph became the third generation of his family to receive Scouting's highest honor. He has been preceded by his son, Dr. John Boys, and his twin grandsons, John Franklin and Austin. As an Eagle Scout myself, I would like to welcome Ralph to the ranks of Eagle Scout, and Congressman Mick Mulvaney asked me to associate his remarks with these. And Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Edina High School teacher Jackie Rail for being named this year's Minnesota Teacher of the Year. Out of more than 300 teachers that were nominated, Jackie was recognized for her outstanding work in reducing the achievement gap. By using teaching methods that engage different students from different skills and backgrounds, she was able to teach her students more effectively and help improve test scores. After several years of researching teaching methods, surveying students as well as parents, Jackie and her team recently gained approval to merge advanced placement classes and regular English classes into one course to make sure that all students that she teaches are able to be challenged and excel. Mr. Speaker, Jackie has absolutely shown incredible passion for her profession, for her students, and for her community. I congratulate her on her much-deserved recognition as she continues her success in teaching, leading, and inspiring Minnesota's youth. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Speak for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, in conjunction with Teacher Appreciation Week, is National Substitute Teacher Recognition Week, recognizing the 270,000 men and women who fill in for permanent teachers every day in the United States. Research by the Substitute Teacher Institute at Utah State University shows that approximately 1 year of every kid's K-12 education is conducted by those extraordinary individuals who are willing to take on the challenge of providing quality education when the permanent teacher is out of the classroom. I taught for 28 years. I have substituted my colleagues' classes. It is a miserable job. But these members of the community who fill the void in education are worthy of our recognition. I'd also like to recognize and commend the Substitute Teacher Institute, which since 1995 has been providing activities and techniques to substitutes and providing leadership in their service to districts and substitute teachers nationwide. The Substitute Teacher Institute works to revolutionize the role of substitute teachers into opportunities for educational excellence. I commend them, and I wish to commend all those people who are substitutes in our nation's school system. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House the following request.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Carson of Indiana for today, May 7th, and Tuesday, May 8th. And Mr. Jones of North Carolina for today and for Tuesday, May 8th.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
I thank the Speaker very much, and I ask unanimous consent that members may have 5 days to submit their statements into the record.
Without objection.
This evening, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to be anchoring the Congressional Black Caucus Hour on voter protection. At the same time that I have the privilege of hosting this very important discussion, let me make note of the fact that our very distinguished member, Congressman Charlie Rangel, is being toasted and recognized by our members, and I know that many of them will be commemorating Congressman Rangel, who is a dear friend of mine, who served as an assistant U.S. attorney, a Korean War vet, who understands when soldiers go to battle, they go to battle so that others might have the opportunity for freedom. And certainly embodied in freedom has to be the idea of being able to vote. So this evening, as I discuss these issues, I am delighted to acknowledge him and as well to acknowledge that this is really a bipartisan, and it should be a bipartisan concern, because in essence we should not be at this moment speaking about who you vote for as much as we are speaking about allowing you to vote for the person of your choice, but to be able to cast your vote unfettered. And Mr. Speaker, that is what my discussion will be about tonight. But as I do so, allow me just for a moment to be able to share if you will, point that I hope that we all can adhere to. This is going to be a tough election season. There are many actors, if you will, that will be involved in this process. This is a presidential year, Mr. Speaker, and so it's going to get particularly feisty. But I do believe that there is a certain collegiality and collaborativeness or collaboration as it circles around voting and the idea of voting and voting with an equal opportunity. But I will, even in our words, we need to try and make sure that we are lifting the voters up. And I heard a comment that I hope, though it was tongue-in-cheek with a little humor, someone who was introducing the intended Republican nominee indicated in his remarks very loudly, Osama is dead. And in the midst of it, he indicated, I mean Osama bin Laden. And I assume he was trying to make a play on words. But I really hope that we can stay above the line of decency as we recognize that we live in difficult times. As a member of the Homeland Security Committee, we just heard publicly about a particular effort to attack our aviation assets. It was just announced today as breaking news, and we realize that we live in challenging times. For that reason, I think this discussion on voter protection is extremely important. And so let me just say to my friends that until now, historically, the voting franchise has only been expanded. This is most evident in the constitutional amendments that have been passed to protect and expand the right to vote. And since the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it really has been a bipartisan congressional prerogative to ensure access to the ballot. When President Lyndon Baines Johnson, one of the presidents that has been touted as having the greatest legislative record, had to cobble together Republicans and Democrats from the Deep South, then called the Dixiecrats, moderate Republicans from the North and Midwest, he successfully passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and successfully passed the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It was a bipartisan effort. And I might say that many members who have reflected, who have had a chance to encounter, some still in this House. I remember most famously Jack Brooks, after it was all said and done, felt that they had done the right thing. Today I was at a middle school, Dowling, and I indicated to them that I would be on the floor of the House discussing voter protection. And I was inspired by those young people, middle schoolers, who were attentive to learn what their government did. And as I left telling them not how to vote, but that they must vote, there was a great excitement in the room. I'm on this floor today for them and all middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, senior citizens, new immigrants who have taken the oath of office with such great pride, longtime voters, new voters, voters who have the right to vote. That's what we're talking about. And unfortunately, a series of laws do not go after those who do not have the right to vote, but these series of voter ID laws and new rules and regulations to stop people from voting goes after documented legal voters with legal voting certificates who have done nothing wrong. Shame on those who would do so. I just read recently that the lead person opposing the voter ID law in Pennsylvania, if I am correct, I believe it's my recollection now, would be 93 years old. That's who we're hurting. Senior citizens. People who have toiled and worked and paid their taxes, paid into Medicare, and now, because of when they were born, such as my mother, Ivelita Jackson, they do not have a birth certificate. We tried, we looked, we still have an inquiry in. God bless her soul, my mother has since passed while we were in the midst of looking for the certificate for a number of reasons. But she had her voting card, and she was eligible to vote. But under new voting ID laws, she would not be eligible to vote. And here's a woman who raised her children, paid her taxes, self-educated herself, achieved a status of a vocational nurse in times when education was not gifted to her. A recent report by the Brennan Center for Justice of NYU Law School concluded that the newly enacted state laws that would affect more than 5 million eligible voters will disproportionately disenfranchise young, low-income, elderly, and minority voters. In 2006, the Brennan Center completed a nationwide survey of voting-age citizens and found that African-American voters are more than 3 times as likely as Caucasians to lack a government-issued ID. But the real nonsense of it all is that voter IDs are to avoid voter impersonation. And voter impersonation is a finite, small part of any kind of voter fraud. In fact, under the Bush administration, there was less than 20, if you will, that were prosecuted. 20. We're talking about a country of 300 million. And this is by recollection. I think there were some 180 cases that were brought forward, and they only wind up prosecuting a small, finite number. But the heavy burden on minority voters seems patently unfair, and it seems to be a direct result of the great enthusiasm of all voters in 2008. I want to see that all the time, and sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. Isn't it interesting when the wave of Tea Party voters had such an impact in 2010, and many of them were new voters? I didn't fare well in that, meaning my party's particular position, but it was the American way. All of a sudden, even with these new voters and the will of the people being adhered to, all of a sudden these new laws come out of the very people who are new to the voting process, many of them, and were excited about voting in 2010. Now comes a sledgehammer to prevent others from voting. In Texas, thanks to new voter ID, students may not use their school-issued IDs to vote, which is part of an effort to restrict student IDs as a valid form of identification to vote. This is the same state that will allow Texans with a concealed weapons permit to use their permits to vote, but a student who is trying to get an education who has a state-issued ID card is not afforded the same privilege to use their student IDs. Mind you, the Purview A&M case established a Supreme Court case that students could vote where they go to school. I remember that, because we marched some 7 miles plus down an interstate to Purview A&M, thousands, to determine that students have a right at Purview A&M that set historical Supreme Court decision. And by the way, this was not, in essence, a liberal court. This decision was made under the Bush administration that determined that students can vote, and now the state of Texas is suggesting that they can't use their ID. Shame on them. Frankly, this seems out of whack. A student should be able to use their ID to vote. 11% of U.S. citizens, or more than 21 million Americans, do not have government-issued photo identification. Also, as many as 25% of all African American citizens of voting age do not have government-issued IDs. Voter IDs have a disproportionate unfair impact on low-income individuals, racial and ethnic minorities, and this has a heavy burden on Hispanic voters in Texas. We found out that many Hispanic voters live in counties where there is no Department of Public Safety office for them to even go to. Mr. Speaker, do we get an airplane, a helicopter? What do we tell individuals who have toiled, who have worked and are second and third generation Texans, but just because of their aging status, maybe because of health reasons, they cannot get a voter ID? Senior citizens, voters with disabilities, and others. Many of these individuals do not have government-issued ID or the money to even acquire one. Yes, under Texas law, they can vote by mail. But I tell you, getting information to people is very hard. If you're used to going and voting on a Sunday, if you're used to being taken when your family members have the time to take you, which is weekend voting, and you're used to taking your voter certificate, and now the new law says no, what an outrage. But I have relief. As it relates to Texas, I have just spoken to the Justice Department and have been reissued a letter that indicates that the Texas voter ID law is invalid as it relates to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a cause for celebration. Our primary will be May 29th, and that law will be invalid for both the primary and the runoff. And I've asked the state of Texas to not hide that information and to come out with a clear annunciation, not a negative announcement that says the Justice Department has found or stopped the Texas voter ID law. That doesn't help anybody understand anything. You have to come out. Your duty is to be impartial as a state election officer, and you are to come out and say that the current law, not the voter ID law that is invalid under the Voting Rights Act, until a further court determination can be made, which is not until the July 2012 court hearing. It is important for us to work together as state officials to let everyone know your voting certificate is an appropriate document to allow you to vote. That is what government is supposed to do. Give fair and impartial information no matter where it falls. And I look forward to working with our state government to ensure that impartial information is now promoted to all people, everyone. Your voting certificate is a legitimate document, and if you do not have a voter ID, state-issued voter ID, you can vote in your primary, whether it is Republican, Democratic, or any other primary that is viable in the state of Texas. Why is that so difficult to do? More than 21 million Americans do not have government-issued photo identification, which includes, again, 25% of African-American voting-age citizens, more than 5.5 million people. 15% of those earning less than $35,000 a year. 18% of those ages 65 and above, and more than 6 million voters. 20% of young voters 18 to 29, much higher in the Hispanic community. According to the photo ID, proposals are not new, with calls for strict voter identification laws emerging out of the 2000 presidential election, when conservative watchdog groups contended that laws intending to facilitate voting, such as the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, known as Motor Voter, had opened the doors to illegal voting. That's impossible, Mr. Speaker. Didn't look like the folks who thought that they were losing suffered too much in the 2000 presidential election. The candidate of their choice was elected, was ascending to the presidency. I can't imagine why they would feel that they had been violated by the 1993 Motor Voter, which means that you could just register to vote at your various sites around the community, including the Motor Vehicle Department. The Justice Department, under Attorney General Ashcroft, pledged that cracking down on so-called voter fraud will be a top priority of the Bush administration Justice Department, though ultimately the department's own extensive analysis found little evidence of voting improprieties. Congress passed the Help America Vote Act in 2002, establishing uniform minimum voter identification requirements, prompting calls that states should go further. Mr. Speaker, this is for everybody. I can't stop or investigate who is coming to the polls and suggest that if you are this party or that party, stay away. Why wouldn't we want to help everyone? Since 2001, more than 700 voter identification bills have been introduced in 46 states, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. A dozen states have passed new voter ID laws since 2003, but only 8 states require photo ID of voters, and only 2 have laws as strict as those being proposed in this year. That was before. Now, we have, in essence, a new day. We have some tough laws that are hurting voters. We're talking about voter protection, but we have to overcome voter suppression. If you look at this map, you will see that we are being overwhelmed by voter ID requirements. I would say almost 2/3 of the states have inappropriately and incorrectly believed that they are going to make voting far more secure. Let me tell you what an ID does. It stops you from impersonating another person. That has been the lowest level of voter fraud because you're silly to impersonate because you're going into a place that might subject you to an arrest. In the state of Texas, precinct judges have the status of a district judge on Election Day. And so this map will show you how bad it is. Look at the yellow. Look at the red, excuse me. Requires voter ID. Big Texas. That's why I need the state to announce that the voter ID law is invalid for the May 29th primary, because it looks as if we have a requirement that does not exist for this primary. Someone hear me. We are obligated to tell the 21 million plus Texans they have the right with a voting certificate if they're registered to vote for the May 29th primary. That red is getting pretty strong. Blue, photo ID requested. The red was photo ID, require photo ID only. Nothing else. How absurd. In essence, we're taking a match and burning the voting certificates that people work so hard to get, that allows people to vote, that you tell people to be registered again. It also disallows organizations like the League of Women Voters, puts a very heavy hand on what happens when you register people to vote and how you have to get those registration in. The big stop sign, that's why it's red. It's the Stop People from Voting law. Then look at the voter ID requested, blue states. Then look at the voter ID legislation proposed. It covers 90% of America. How absurd. And I would be open to finding a way to ensure that that diminished, limited amount of fraud is taken care of. But this is what it does. It puts a red stop sign, stop from voting. It frightens people from voting. It keeps people from voting. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit this into the record.
Without objection.
I thank the Speaker. And then, of course, another big fat red